I want to show you how to tackle one of these exam questions that has algorithms in it. You're going to get a couple of these, and you can either do this using pseudocode or a flowchart, whichever's easiest for you. In this video I'm going to use pseudocode. Flowchart is a little bit more challenging to show you at this point. Now, one thing to notice about all of these algorithms is that they all start with input. So here it is, there's my input section. They've all got some sort of process that goes on, and then they've all got some sort of output. So they always have those three elements to them: input, process, and output. The other thing to notice about this one is that there seems to be some sort of validation here. It's asking the user to enter that time until the time entered is valid. So we've got to try and deal with that situation as well. Now, one thing about the way that you write algorithms is that you don't need to, in the exam, worry about making them pretty. You don't need to worry about having lots of prompts for the user, so print this on the screen, print that on the screen. You can go straight into just the input section. You'll see that in a minute. When you take it into Python to program it, obviously you want to tidy that up and make it a little bit easier for the user to use. So let me walk you through this and try and break it down for you. So I'm going to start with what this algorithm needs to do. So allows a dog walking company to work out the charge for a client. And the algorithm, well, the first thing it says is prompt the user to enter the time the dogs have walked for in hours. So I've got to get the amount of time from the user in hours. Now I'm going to keep this really, really simple. I'm not going to worry too much about anything pretty, as I've said. So let's start off with the first thing, which is input. And I'm going to give it a proper variable or identifier name. So proper variable, so hours walked. And the next thing it says is it wants me to force the user to enter the time, keep doing it until the time is greater than 0. Well, there's a couple of ways to do this, but the easiest way to do a validation is to use some kind of loop, and in this case the while loop. And there's only two loops really, while and for, but let's do a while loop here. So while hours walked, and it's got to be greater than 0. So what I want to do is check so is it less than or equal to 0? I'm going to push it a little bit there. And what I now need to do is, if it is less than or equal to 0, well, we've got to get the user to put the time in again. So input hours walked. And notice I'm not worrying about any fancy messages or anything clever here. We can add that into the Python later on. The algorithm doesn't say we need it. Okay, so that's my input section done. So now I'm going to deal with the process bit. And what we're going to do is think about this in a very simple way. This is a very easy one. So the cost of the dog walk notice the use of the back arrow here. That means assigned to. So take everything I'm going to do over here on this right hand side and save it in this variable cost. And that's a very simple one. What that one is the hours walked, and it's it's £20 an hour, so let's multiply that by 20. So there's my process section. Notice that's a very small section here. There are others which are bigger. And the final thing I need to do is just output the final charge for the dog walk. So output cost. And actually that is my algorithm done. There's nothing else that needs to happen inside it. Let's see if we can turn that into Python. So let's move things around a little bit. I'm just going to move that over there so I can still see it. Make that a little bit smaller. And now I'm going to bring my Python in. And so here it comes. And what I've got here is I've got a blank space for things to go into. So what I need to do is, first of all, get the hours walked in. Now I'm going to make this a little bit friendlier. So hours walked. equals input, and this is the friendly bit. Okay. I've now got to do my validation bit. So this is the while loop. So I've got to force the user to enter an hour that is greater than 0. So while, notice that Python goes purple here, so it changes the color to help you a little bit. So while hours walked is less than or equal to 0. Now because this is Python, it needs a colon here to tell you that this is the end of that line, and it's going to automatically push me on to the next line. So notice it's tabbed in again. And what I now need to do is to force the user to enter the hours again. So hours walked equals input Okay. Now things to be careful of, so make sure that you finish your lines properly. Sometimes people forget the brackets, sometimes they'll forget the speech marks. So that's my validation done. So what I'm going to do is have a look at my processing section. And this is nice and easy. The cost is going to become the hours walked star, because that's the equivalent of times in Python, in 20. And finally, what I need to do is my output section. And I can make it a bit prettier here. So print cost will be now let's see if that works. So what I'm going to do is just change my windows very slightly, just to alter things a little bit so you can see what's going on. So I'm just going to take this away, and what I'm going to do, this is the shell, so this is where the output's going to appear. So let me have a look at this. So I'm just going to call it dog walk. And now it asks me for the hours walked, so I'm going to give it -10 to see if my validation is working, and it doesn't appear to be. So let's have a look and see what's going on here. And what you'll see is actually hours walked is a integer variable, but I've actually brought it in as a string. So what I need to do here is just to force it to be an integer. And I also need to do that here. You don't necessarily need to do this in pseudocode. Pseudocode, it kind of assumes that's what's going on, but you could do if you wanted to. So let's try that again. So -10. Okay, so now it's full. It's unhappy with that. Let's try the 0. It's unhappy with that. Okay, let's try a normal value. Let's try 10. And there we go, there's the cost, will be £200. So that outputs it there. So just to reiterate a few things that I've been through. So we've got our algorithm over here. Our algorithm contains an input section, a little bit of validation there, checking that the hours walked is correct, processes the cost, and outputs the cost. When we turn that into Python, what we end up with is having to, because this is an integer that's being saved, having to convert it to an integer first. I showed you that error that I made. That line is pretty much the same except for that colon there. Same thing as in the first line there, so I've got my integer being stored there. And just watch out for your brackets and your speech marks. And then finally, then what you've got is you've got the cost being calculated. Notice in pseudocode that looks like a back arrow. And then finally I've got my output, and I didn't have to do this in the exam answer over here, but in the Python, I've prettied it up a little bit.